celebrate the 40th anniversary of the publication of Watchmen, one of the most highly acclaimed and revered comic books of all time. Let's take a comprehensive look at every action figure ever produced from this groundbreaking graphic novel. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures. Watchmen, by writer Alan Moore and artist Dave Gibbons, remains one of the most important comic books ever produced. It was the only comic to appear on Time magazine's list of the 100 greatest English-language novels of the past century. Initially pitched by Moore as a story involving the Charlton Comics superhero lineup that had recently been acquired by DC, it morphed into a deconstruction of the superhero genre, and in many ways, of comic books themselves. I was the seminal age of 13 years old in 1986, arguably the greatest year in comics history. Marvel published the Daredevil Born Again story. DC produced Batman The Dark Knight Returns. And Art Spiegelman's Mouse, A Survivor's Tale, was first collected, still the only comic to win a Pulitzer Prize. But it was Watchmen that changed everything. On the surface, it told the story of a murder mystery set against a world on the brink of nuclear war. But beneath that, it fundamentally redefined the superhero genre and elevated the comic book medium into the realm of serious literature through its dense storytelling, deep philosophical themes, and innovative visual techniques. Now, there are plenty that will argue that it ruined comics forever, ushering in an era of grim and gritty storytelling, blurring the lines between heroes and villains. But one thing is for certain, there are two time frames in modern comics: before Watchmen and after. To celebrate the 15th anniversary of the book's publication, DC Direct announced a line of Watchmen action figures. The initial prototypes of the Comedian, Silk Spectre, and Dr. Manhattan debuted at San Diego Comic-Con in 2000, and they looked perfect. DC Direct's main sculptor, Tim Bruckner, was known for sculpting figures that looked like they stepped straight off of the page, and these perfectly captured Dave Gibbons' clean artwork. Gibbons himself even worked with the toy makers to get these exactly right. Then they were canceled. Alan Moore shut the door on these figures, as well as all the plans DC had for the 15th anniversary. Some say it was over lack of compensation for previous Watchmen promotional items. Others say it was over censorship issues with his ABC line of comics. But either way, it was over. This was devastating to us in the action figure community. So much so that these figures were featured on the cover of Toy Fair as the most wanted lost figures of all time. So I guess that's it. End of story. Like and subscribe. Then, in 2005, after almost 20 years of bouncing from studio to studio, the rights to a Watchmen movie ended up at Warner Brothers, who tapped a young Zack Snyder, fresh off his smash comic adaptation of 300, to direct. Previously thought to be unfilmable due to its dense storytelling and complex themes, Snyder disagreed and produced a slavishly faithful adaptation, literally using the comic itself for storyboards. And movies mean merchandise, so let's look at the figures that DC Direct produced for the 2009 Watchmen film. Let's start at the beginning, or maybe it's the ending, or maybe it's the beginning of the end. Anyway, we're going to begin with the Comedian because it was his death in the opening panels of Watchmen that set the entire story going on. Now, the Comedian here is portrayed by Jeffrey Dean Morgan in the film, and I think it's pretty appropriate that a character who's pretty much a psychopath is played by somebody who goes by three names, like a serial killer or, an assassin. It's a decent figure. The head sculpt is pretty cool. I do like the cigar kind of in his mouth, and his scar that is a real major aspect of his later character is pretty well represented here. You see some of the limitations with DC Direct, very, very minimal articulation, and even the articulation that we have isn't super functional, but that's not what you're going for with these figures. You're going for a more accurate screen representation, and I think that this certainly does that. They did keep the Comedian's costume very similar to the one in the comics, and I think that's a big plus for this. And we actually got a variant of this figure with an unmasked version. Now, truthfully, I don't think the unmasked version looks as close to the actor as the masked version does, but at least we got two different versions of the comedian. Big plus, they got his smiley face button correct on his costume. Probably the number one thing that they had to get right, they managed to do. Dr. Manhattan clearly shows the strengths and the weaknesses of DC Direct's figures. It has a gorgeous sculpt it looks like it just leapt exactly off of the screen. Incredible sculpted detail, really great proportions, but just hardly any articulation at all, particularly here at the hands. What are you going to do with this? These hands are fixed in this position. There is no rotation there. Sure, you've got a little bit of a ball shoulder, but nothing else. And then you just have him kind of in this bland standing pose where, of course, with this V cut hip, you can't do much about that. But I will give DC Direct credit because they solved the problem. Yep, he comes apart. And you can add the more classic floating legs. So now the hands actually make sense. This is kind of the classic look for Dr. Manhattan, just kind of floating and glowing right above everyone else. And speaking of glowing, he got a second figure as well in a more glowing form. So there's your kind of colored comic one. Here is the translucent glowing one. This one you could switch the legs out as well, but why would you do that? You're always going to basically have it in this look. So another one that is, absolutely identical to Dave Gibbons' comics design. So they did stay true to that, but not exactly an action figure. Legacy is a huge part of the dense, complex mythology of Watchmen, and these DC Direct figures gave us some legacy characters, including the very first version of Night Owl. So this is Night Owl 1 from the 1940s in his Minutemen garb, the kind of traditional, the superheroes is a stretch, the costumed heroes of the 1940s, and he really does. He's got that great kind of old-fashioned look, rocking the shorts and everything. And this is pretty accurate to the look in the comics. And because, as we mentioned, each of these characters is based off of a Charlton character, Night Owl is based off of Blue Beetle, who had a Golden Age version prior to his Silver Age version. So this first Night Owl represents kind of the Golden Age look of the character, whereas the one that really was the predominant one in the comic and in the movie, Night Owl 2, is based off of the Silver Age version. So Night Owl, of course, like I said, based off of the Ted Kord version of Blue Beetle, kind of a Batman-y, not super powered, but used a lot of gimmicks, used his intelligence and his inventiveness. Unfortunately, this one, it definitely looks like Night Owl, but they went with that more modern kind of armored superhero suit look. One of the big factors of Night Owl is he was a little bit paunchy, and that's kind of lost in this like really fit thing. They got the cape pretty well right, and the mask kind of looks like what Night Owl looked like, but this one nowhere near as comic accurate as the ones we've seen previously. The next main legacy character that we see in the line is Silk Spectre, and this is our first Night Owl's contemporary. This is Silk Spectre 1. She was one of the Minutemen, and you can see that even though her costume and this character was based on the Charlton kind of villain Nightshade, she has a lot of influence from an old DC character named Phantom Lady. And you can see that very much in the costume, kind of has almost the dominatrix look with the hose and whatnot. But that hairstyle is just so, World War II, 1940s. Really cool because her relationship with her daughter is a major driving point of the story. And of course, we got her daughter, the second Silk Spectre. And this one did take a little bit of liberties from the comic look, but certainly is recognizable as Silk Spectre. I appreciate the fact that they really got the hairstyle right, and the younger look of the actress certainly works. This is Maylene Ackerman, I believe, was the actress on this. Again, very, very little in the way of articulation, but certainly a good representation of this character. Ozymandias is another one that suffered very much from the modern makeover of superhero costumes at the time. Again, it's this kind of metallic armored look. And while there's hints of his original comic costume, This one for me really kind of misses the mark. You know, you don't have the eye symbol is kind of here, but it's not up here on this. His cape doesn't look the same. You know, he had more of a billowing look across here. He does have the domino mask, but I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this headdress. This is one where, in going for the modern look, I think you lose some of the things that really were unique and special about the character. And of course, the breakout character from both the comic and the movie, Rorschach. Really, really comic accurate Rorschach. They changed hardly anything for this character's design. They managed in the movie to get his changing, constantly morphing mask, and the static that they feature that they got right here, I think really does look exactly like something that Dave Gibbons would have drawn on the page. So a nice choice on the blot, the ink blot that they used for this. Of course, he has his trench coat. He's got his like ascot scarf in here, the purple pants and the shoes. And I think you can tell like these boots that he's wearing, these shoes are like heightening shoes. They're lifts to try to make the character who was actually quite short a little bit taller. Nice touch. Really, really well sculpted. Look at the flowing lines. And he looks like, even in this static position, the way that they got the folds of the clothes, the folds of the trench coat, he looks like he's moving, which is a good thing because he doesn't move. I mean, there is just so little going on movement wise. You know, with his head kind of cocked at an angle, it really only works in the one still position. But from a comic accurate standpoint, it's really, really good. And he also got a variant where we got an unmasked Rorschach with the head sculpt of the actor Jackie Earle Haley. And once again, you've got a psychopathic character in Rorschach played by an actor who goes by three names. So is this an accident? Did the casting director know something else? You know, were they thinking that these guys were going to go on to become, you know, serial rapists? Who knows? But it certainly worked out. And you get the red hair, you get the look. I think that's a pretty decent unmasked Rorschach. But these 8 figures constituted all of the 6-inch action figures that we were able to get for the Watchmen film. But DC Direct wasn't quite done because they did produce the 3 most comic accurate figures in their 13-inch DC Icons line. Let's take a look at each one of these. Dr. Manhattan was clearly the easiest to make when all they had to do was take their base body, color it blue, and stick a hydrogen atom on his forehead, and voila! You've got a figure. Now, I'm actually being a little bit unfair. This character actually did come with a full, like, suit of clothing, like an entire suit that he could wear. But who knows where that is? It's been 20 years since these figures came out. You see the underlying body. It's actually a really good frame. They use this for almost all of the DC 13-inch icons, but you can get him into kind of that classic Dr. Manhattan floating pose. Not a bad looking figure. Comedian is particularly nice. There's way more going on with this outfit for him than there are any of the other figures. I like the fact that his cigar looks like it's actually lit and is smoking. You do get his scar, which is a little bit more difficult to see on this one, and his domino mask can actually be removed, giving you a honestly not very accurate looking head sculpt of the actor. Again, though, this is a costume that is incredibly similar to the one in the book. He does come with a couple of pistols in their holsters, and it should be good because this guy actually cost $125 when he came out in the early 2000s. The other two were $100. So you actually had to spend $25 extra on this guy. So he better be good. And of course, we got Rorschach. And you can see some of the limitations of going with soft goods for everything compared to what we were able to achieve with the plastic figures, particularly with the mask. It just kind of looks like he has like a dirty sock on his head. And even these years later, it almost looks like it's blurring. I don't know if that's meant to kind of try to give the motion of the ink blot that was always constantly changing on his mask or not. The fedora's pretty good. It fits fairly well. He's got his ascot. He has his trench coat, purple pants. You know, I mean, of course, Rorschach was based off of The Question, a Steve Ditko original creation, who was really based off of another Ditko creation titled Mr. A, and the extreme attitudes of those were what Alan Moore wrote into the Rorschach character. So it's pretty cool anytime you get a Ditko type character. And in many ways, Rorschach represented Alan Moore's description of Ditko throughout the entire book. So pretty cool looking figure. Hey, if you enjoy the intersection of comics history and action figures as much as I do, let me know in the comments and give the video a like. And subscribe to Carbon Scoring, because we're bringing you quality content like this every week. And hey, if those were the only figures ever made, I think we as collectors could live with that. They weren't perfect, but the Rorschach, Dr. Manhattan, and Comedian were incredibly comic accurate, and that's pretty good. Then a miracle happened. In 2012, toy giant Mattel announced a six-figure line of comic-based Watchmen figures coming to their Matty Collector subscription service in 2013. Dubbed Club Black Freighter, a nod to the comic within the comic, these figures were released over the course of the year in incredibly collector-friendly packaging, giving you the option of displaying the figure in the package or using the packaging itself to create multiple backdrops, including the famous Who Watches the Watchmen graffiti wall. Yes, now we finally have some comic accurate figures. Now, that doesn't make that big of a difference for Dr. Manhattan because his look is so simplistic. He's just a naked blue guy with some shorts on and a hydrogen atom. But the addition of shadows under the eyes definitely adds a little bit more of a comic look. Speaking of the comics, this is a good time to talk about what the references were for these characters. I mentioned that Alan Moore had originally proposed doing these with Charlton Heroes, the Charlton Comics line, the independent comics line that had basically gone out of business, and DC had bought the rights to their superhero line. Well, Dr. Manhattan is based off of Captain Atom, a Steve Ditko creation from the 1960s. He's, an atomically powered superhero, and that is where his origin comes from. And we'll go through that with the rest of these characters. Using the DC Universe Classics body does give this figure a lot more articulation, but because these sculpts are all basically the same, they're very homogenous looking. They were sculpted by the Four Horsemen, but all of the kind of powerful male figures are using this same body. It doesn't have quite the same unique sculpt those original DC Direct figures that we never got would have had. But overall, for an action figure of Dr. Manhattan, this is really good. Now we're talking. Look at this Ozymandias figure. This is the kind of comic look for Ozymandias that I want. The gold, the purple. He's got the giant, almost like saucer here around him. He's got the simple headband, the eye symbol. Really, really great. Now, Ozymandias was based on the Charlton character Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, and they don't have a lot visually in common, but Peter Cannon was a character who had maximized out his physical and mental abilities. He was basically functioning as the perfect human mentally and physically, and that was sort of Ozymandias's superpower, so to speak. So that was the part that Alan Moore brought over for this character. Visually, Dave Gibbons based this much more on Egyptian iconography, also Alexander the Great. He took his name from Ramses II, the longest serving pharaoh in the history of Egypt. So there's a lot of that going on with this. And I think with this gold metallic paint off of the purple, that gives such a regal look. No, this is a really, really good Ozymandias figure. He did have an alternate head with his mask, but in the book, he's predominantly seen without it. He only wore it just for a very brief period of time when the crime busters were trying to happen. So for me, this is the definitive look for this guy. The comic style comedian, I think, is really good. And truthfully, this one has probably the most Dave Gibbons-esque head sculpt, the deep carving of the scar, the forehead, with a little bit of a wrinkled brow so that you can tell this is an older version of comedian. The mustache is much more accurate. The only thing is the head's a little bit small on this body, but I'll give it up because the accuracy is so good. Plus, the suit is just terrific, straight out of the book with his flamethrower to put down riots back in the day. The one place where this figure really failed, and it's kind of almost unforgivable, is not including the smiley face on his button. I have no idea if like Forrest Gump still holds the copyright to the smiley face and that's why they couldn't put it on there, but it seems like in a figure where they tried so hard to give us so much accuracy, missing that is pretty criminal. Silk Spectre is almost perfect. She captures the look of the character in the book so well, even down to the SS earrings that she has, the haircut, the face, and they used this kind of soft rubbery plastic to get that sort of veneer look of her costume that came straight out of the book. This one is really well done. Now, as a female figure, she doesn't have nearly as much articulation as the male figures, but there's some. You got to be really careful with this waist swivel because you don't want to tear this rubbery plastic. But this is definitely what a comic Silk Spectre should look like. I saved my favorite two for last. Night Owl is great. Again, that looks like a Dave Gibbons drawing come to life. And the way that they got the cape to flank down over his shoulders, straight out of the book. I mean, absolutely perfect. And what I really appreciate is they did give him a little bit of a different piece here for his middle. Instead of having sculpted abs, this smooth look and the fact that it's, maybe paunched out a little bit, comic accurate, really brings that overweight, out of shape, retired superhero look to the plastic action figure. He comes with one of his grappling guns, which is a nod to his technical abilities. And of course, he's got his utility belt there. This is really good. Now, his head movement is certainly limited by the shape of this Night Owl mask, but fair warning, that's okay. The fact that this cape just comes down so well, for me, that absolutely makes this figure. And of course, Rorschach. Again, you've got the purple pants. You've got his grappling gun that he stole from Night Owl that he used to kill someone. You've got the mask, which I think is another really good ink blot. Instead of being just overtly a face, it kind of gives that, but without just right selling it too much. The trench coat looks grimy and dirty. It's like unbuttoned over on this side, but buttoned up on this side. If I had any one complaint, the fedora is maybe a little bit small on his head. I kind of hate that because it is such a key part of the look. It could be upsized just a little bit, but that is forgiven for this one detail. The fact that they had the ripped off button, that they actually looked and considered that his jacket is so old, worn, and tattered, and the way that Dave Gibbons drew it in the book with one button missing, including that piece of detail, that goes a long way. And that certainly should have been it. One of Watchmen's greatest strengths is that it was a completely self-contained story, beginning, middle, and end. A moment captured in time, completely encapsulated, never to be spoiled. Yeah, right. Money always talks. 2012 brought a number of prequel miniseries under the heading Before Watchmen, with Darwin Cook's Minutemen considered the best of the bunch. Then, in 2017, two of my all-time favorite creators, writer Jeff Johns and artist Gary Frank, were tapped with producing a sequel to Watchmen, one that would integrate the story into DC's main continuity. Titled Doomsday Clock, these two brilliant creators proved that this was indeed an impossible task. Critical reaction was mixed. The book was gorgeous and ambitious, and thematically attempted to restore some of the light from the darkness that was Watchmen's legacy. Hey, and we got more toys! DC Direct produced 3 2-packs of figures, including 2 new characters introduced in Doomsday Clock. The first of the 2-packs had redos of Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias, and while you do get a dedicated sculpt for Dr. Manhattan, I think it's probably more similar to what we saw in the Mattel figures than it is anything else. Because of this waist piece, you can't really get his feet together to do that sort of floating look. He does have a really cool, touch you and kill you finger, which is, kind of cool. I don't know that Rorschach thinks it's very cool, but it's still pretty cool. Definitely has more of that comic look with the shading and the hydrogen atom. Overall, it's a decent figure, but I don't know that it's actually a step up from what we've gotten previously. Whereas I think the Ozymandias is actually a step down. These figures are larger. They're more in 7-inch scale than the 6-inch scale from Mattel. And of course, he does have nice gold and purple. The head sculpt, though, is just kind of generic blonde guy. It really does not look at all like Ozymandias from the comic. And DC Direct, back in their heyday with Tim Bruckner doing the sculpting, that was something that they never missed. I mean, it was obvious who the artist inspiration was for each of these figures. So again, this one, I don't think this is superior to the Matty Collector one. Our final two packs came with one figure we'd already gotten and one original figure. These were obviously the ones that we had already gotten. And this comedian it's a step down. I mean, I like the fact that he's got his twin guns and the colors are nice, I guess. There's a bit of a sheen to the pants that gives it more of that leather look versus kind of the Kevlar up here. But the head sculpt doesn't look at all like the comedian from the comics. Now, he's the older version with, kind of the silver temples, but nah, this is a miss. And unfortunately, I feel like about the same for Rorschach. Now, the overall sculpting is quite good. I do think that the removable hat is better proportioned for the figure. I think that looks good. His grappling gun is nowhere near as detailed as the one that we got previously. And while the sculpting of the trench coat itself does look nice, they didn't get that detail right with the button. But the area where I'm really the most disappointed is the look of the ink blot. I mean, this looks more like kabuki art than it does an ink blot. It's almost as if they tried too hard to get an actual facial expression out of this ink blot instead of just allowing it to be a Rorschach blot. And for me, that takes away from the figure. It's like a face instead of just a regular ink blot. So I'm actually going to downgrade this one as well. But for me, the clear highlight of these two packs were the new characters that were introduced in Doomsday Clock: Marionette and Mime. Now, Jeff Johns was the writer, the creator of these from a writing standpoint, and in classic Watchmen fashion, he based these off of old Charlton characters. So there were two Charlton bad guys. It was a husband-wife team called Punch and Julie, and that was obviously a play on words of Punch and Judy, the puppet shows that were very famous in England in the 1800s. And so they're almost clown-like appearance of Punch and Julie translates well over to Marionette and Mime. These characters are brilliantly designed. I mean, that's where Gary Frank, the artistic creator of them, really came through. I love the little lines so that it looks like she has like a puppet mouth, and of course the little blushes and everything. Her outfit kind of has that Harlequin look to it, but is still unique. Mime, just perfect mime. Just and you can tell from that facial expression that comes through that this guy does not speak. He is absolutely silent. And if you've read the book, he's actually carrying his weapons right now. And that was these two were definitely the saving grace character-wise of Doomsday Clock. And I am very happy to have them included in my Watchmen collection. So what do you guys think? Are you satisfied with the Watchmen figures that we've gotten? Or do you want to see even more? Would you like to dig into some of those Watchmen prequels or even go through the HBO series that I actually thought was really quite excellent? Let me know in the comments. And as always, for the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.